now we're going to move to a very practical case. Again, the terrible COVID-19 pandemic has caused a human death toll of more than 6.2 million people. It's upended economies, caused vast human suffering, and led us to a profound readjustment in our perception of the security and resilience of our societies. We also have the ghastly spectre of conflict re-emerging to challenge our fragile sense of stability. But that doesn't mean that other crises have gone away. The overarching crisis of all crises, which affects health, security, geopolitics, food supplies, habitat loss, virtually everything, is climate, often manifesting itself in extreme weather, heat waves, wildfires, storms, and floods. Last summer, a large part of Europe suffered incredibly damaging floods, and many lives were lost. It was one of those scenarios, and I quote, "we could not imagine." It was unimaginable. Huge solidarity for recovery took place across Europe, and several countries then reviewed their plans, including Germany, which finally decided to deploy a robust and modern public warning system. We are very honoured to welcome our next speaker, Catherine Delcourt, who is Deputy Governor of the Province of Liège, who, to put it simply, managed the crisis in the most effective province of Belgium. Catherine.
Good morning. Let me start by introducing myself. My name is Catherine Delcourt, and I'm the Deputy Governor of the Province of Liège. The Province of Liège is located in the southern French-speaking part of Belgium, which is a federal state. The Province of Liège has 84 municipalities on its territory, including 9 German-speaking municipalities. Last summer, during the terrible floods that took place in Belgium, I was in charge of the management of the crisis. In Belgium, the crisis management is organized at 3 strategic levels. The level that is relevant will depend on different factors, such as the geographical extent, as well as the complexity and needs of the situation. On the field, there is also an operational coordination that is put in place. The operations are organized around 5 key disciplines: firefighters, medical and social assistance, police, logistics, and communication. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome my colleagues, Luc Buret and Stéphane Bouquet, commanding officer of rescue and emergency zones in the province of Liège, and Jean-Marc Dimelen, the director of the Federal Police for the province of Liège. And I want to express my most sincere thanks to them for their precious help, their dedication and commitment to all the victims and those who suffered in this disaster. I would like to continue with a few words about the context. The floods took place in July last year. This happened during the school holidays, just 1 week before the Belgian National Day. Most of the authorities and senior officials of the intervention services were present. This was a huge asset in the management of the crisis. We were also in a post-COVID situation. Nevertheless, we decided not to work remotely, and this was a good choice, as it would have been impossible to work differently. My presentation is above all a testimony, not a detailed analysis of the crisis, and definitively not a lesson. During the night leading to the crisis, several municipalities were hit and had to trigger a crisis phase. For instance, scout camps had to be evacuated. Roads were blocked, houses were flooded, and several power failures took place. So it quickly became a provincial matter. Alerts were received 2 days before, but these were not different from the hundreds of alerts we usually receive. The first warnings were treated as usual floods warnings because Liège is a water province. The province has already been hit by floods in the past, and we already have experience with this type of crisis management. It became clear that we needed to have a provincial coordination committee to manage the situation. Sadly, the official weather alerts are sent with a maximum delay of 24 hours, and the messages can hardly be exploited. Here is what we received. With such information, it is impossible to know what consequences to expect on the ground, and as a result to organize the work to be done. During the morning of the 14th of July, several evacuations had to be carried out spontaneously or following the decision of certain mayors. One of the key moments was when the people in charge of the Hough Dam were obliged to release water, actually a lot of water. Before this operation, many inhabitants had to be evacuated towards rescue centers. This operation was long and difficult because some inhabitants were reluctant to leave their house. Based on our previous experience with floods, we expected the situation to improve, which is usually what happens after a few hours. Here, instead of getting better, the situation got worse. In the middle of the afternoon, there was a spectacular rise of the water level, and without being able to anticipate it, the water level reached the first floor of some houses. The situation got worse and worse during the day and the night. Several houses were destroyed, swept away by the waters. There were already several deaths. Many people were reported missing, and members of the rescue team were in danger. We had to evacuate several areas in other municipalities. The situation was very dangerous. Streets and neighborhoods were trapped. This degradation had a terrible impact on the communication centers, and the emergency numbers were not properly set up to deal with such a disaster. As a result, people looking for help contacted other numbers, and some of these calls had to be treated by our crisis center. Due to the rising waters, we had to move the communication center to 2 other provinces, and that made answering emergency calls even more difficult. This was absolutely necessary to prevent the Astrid communication system from collapsing. Throughout the crisis, despite some damages to the facilities, the Tetra Astrid radio communication system worked well, fortunately. The rescue and emergency operations concerned a huge area with a total of 30 municipalities in the province of Liège. The means at our disposal became very quickly insufficient and not adapted. As soon as they arrived, the additional rescue teams were overwhelmed. They were unable to act because access to the flooded areas was so difficult, and the boats could not be put in the water due to the strength of the current. We were able to call in additional means within the province, and also significant reinforcements at the national level. The Ministry of Defense came to support our operations as well. Private resources were commandeered, jet skis, tractors, construction equipment. Through the European Civil Protection Mechanism, we were able to count on high-quality international assistance, which was of enormous help. Unfortunately, the helicopters could not take off because of the weather conditions and the topography of the flooded area. At one point, 6 helicopters were ready to leave and none could fly. This meant that we were unable to get an overview of the situation on the ground. The essential search and rescue resources were not available to help people who were in panic or even in danger on the roofs of the houses. The helicopter rescue could only be launched on the 16th of July, and we had to wait till the 17th of July to be able to save the last people in danger. As far as the communication is concerned, we decided not to use Be Alert, an alert system via location-based text messages. Indeed, giving a global evacuation alert or a sheltering instruction was impossible and even dangerous. The reality of one street was not the same as the street next to it. In fact, even in the same street, the emergency services could not reach certain houses, while other houses could easily be evacuated. This was a subject of a strategic decision which we had to justify later. The following day, after a horrific night, evacuations continued downstream. The strategic management of the crisis was handed over to the federal level as 3 provinces were badly affected. We continued to be confronted with several other important problems for days and days. Mobility was extremely difficult. A lot of roads were closed and many bridges could not be used. In addition, there was an unbelievable amount of waste, which made it very difficult for large vehicles to travel. The risk of these piles of waste catching fire was very high. We therefore had to organize their evacuation, in particular to a section of a defected motorway. This lasted for weeks. A lot of areas were without electricity and mobile network. Drinking water also became a problem. We also had to deal with dead and live animals, and we had to manage solidarity and donations, a real challenge. We also had to ensure first-line medical assistance and psychosocial support. All this knowing that the weather forecast continued to be bad. At the height of the crisis, 345 people were reported missing. In all, 37 people died in different circumstances. To summarize, I would like to repeat that this was not a crisis, but a terrible disaster. Of course, due to the number of people who died, also due to the geographical extent of the floods. Some public authority buildings were washed away, and the emergency services and authorities were heavily affected and could not function properly. And because of the unthinkable amount of damages, it took us months to have the final figures, like, for instance, the number of the houses that were hit. Furthermore, The first data we see from the expert was not reliable enough and could not be exploited. This brought uncertainty at the height of the crisis. And it was very difficult, not to say impossible, to translate the information and forecasts into concrete consequences on the ground. The means at our disposal were not adapted, but also ineffective. The legislation, the equipment, the personnel, the means, and the training are inadequate for disasters such as this one. I strongly believe that to deal with such a complex situation, simple answers following the KISS principle are absolutely necessary. I also believe that only professionals with in-depth knowledge, solid experience, and great adaptability are able to handle such situations. I would also like to point out the strengths and competencies of the 5 disciplines working together: firefighters, medical and social assistance, police, logistics, and communication. This allowed us to reach a very high level of collective intelligence, which proved to be a precious added value, especially during this crisis and the terrible time we went through. For years, we have been working together on emergency plans and exercises. We have also managed many other smaller crises together: fires, power failures, terrorist attacks, COVID, bad weather, and of course, floods. In my opinion, to question everything about the existing crisis management would not be a good thing. Above all, we need to define a level of risk that the authorities and emergency services need to be prepared for. On this basis, it is necessary to prepare, to equip oneself, to train again and again, in order to structure the response as efficiently as possible. All actors must work with the culture of risk, especially at a local level, because they are the ones who will be able to react as closely as possible to the events. However, the first person responsible for his or her own safety remains the citizen. The citizens must indeed play an active role in their own protection. To reach this objective, we'll still have a long road ahead of us, but it is essential that we follow this road. To conclude, all through the crisis, the safety of the general population was our main objective, along with taking care of the victims, the families, and the people who suffered from these floods. This testimony is a poor representation of the reality and the tragedy that happened to the people living in the flooded areas. It does not reflect the reality of those who waited for hours to be rescued, nor does it reflect the multitude of information exchanged, the phone calls, the text messages, the emails, the meeting, the decisions to be made, the calls for help. The energy spent to verify information, sometimes fake news shared by public figures, the uncertainty that lies at the heart of such management cannot be captured by my simple testimony. During the management of a crisis, time cannot be stopped for no one, neither for the victims, neither for the emergency services and rescue teams who worked relentlessly for days on end, taking considerable risk to the best of their ability and means to help the population in danger. I would like to thank them from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your profound testimony about this disaster. I originally wrote crisis. I have been corrected. It's very moving to think about the incredibly difficult conditions, especially for operating rescue equipment, and the fact that the weather goes on, and the issues that remain after the waters recede. The disaster isn't over then. Those pictures of the waste afterwards are particularly telling. A friend of mine in Belgium sent some to me, and I was, you've never seen anything like that, have you? And all of this during a pandemic. So, you know, I mean, I think we all pay tribute to those who helped to respond during this, and the rescuers and the volunteers. Have we got any questions from the audience? Again, can we have the lights up, please? And we're going to have the questions translated, even though Catherine's English is perfectly good. You know what? It's so hard to see people here. Is there a question? Any questions from the floor? Yes, one over here, please.
Merci. Je m'adresse à Madame Delcourt. Merci beaucoup pour cette présentation. Je m'appelle Rachele Gianfranchi. Je représente les affaires gouvernementales de Everbridge. Et ma question est plutôt une question stratégique. Vous avez mentionné dans votre présentation le choix de ne pas utiliser BE Alert. J'aimerais bien savoir, en tant que système de cell broadcasting, qu'est-ce qui a déterminé le choix stratégique de ne pas utiliser le système et d'utiliser une voie alternative? Merci.
Should we have the... Can you please repeat your question in English also for the audience, please?
Yes. Rachele Gianfranchi from Everbridge. So my question to Madame Delcourt was regarding the strategic choice of not using cell broadcasting, the BE alert system, for alerting the populations in the emergency areas. Thank you.
Donc, nous avons choisi de ne pas utiliser BE Alert pour donner des consignes d'évacuation parce que l'ampleur de la catastrophe ne permettait pas de donner une instruction suffisamment précise.
So we chose not to use BE Alert, so Belgium's public warning system, because the extent and the intensity of the disaster did not allow us to give instructions that were sufficient, like precise enough, actually, to the population.
Et comme le système BE Alert ne permet pas de définir des zones avec grande précision, le risque était que des personnes reçoivent une instruction d'évacuation alors qu'elles étaient en danger si elles sortaient de chez elles. Et on peut peut-être s'appuyer sur le bon sens des citoyens, mais la force de l'eau, on ne la mesure pas toujours très bien. Et avec peu d'eau, mais beaucoup de courant, on peut déjà être emporté. Donc, ce risque-là, on a choisi de ne pas le prendre.
So actually, in our BE Alert system, we cannot be precise enough, actually, to... so basically, the fact that it's not precise enough makes that perhaps we would have sent a message to some affected households with instructions to evacuate, while where they were located, they should not have evacuated, and if they go out, it would mean some danger for them, so which is why we did not use the BE Alert system in that very case, because also the water flows has a very particular pattern, and so we need to be really clear with that.
Thank you. If there are any questions, can I ask you to wave really extravagantly so I can see you? Because it is... does anyone have any questions? Okay, I think that's...
I do have a question, actually.
Okay, you have the floor.
Ok, je vais déjà la demander en français, and then I will repeat in English. Donc en fait, je me demandais sur comment ça s'est passé au niveau de la coopération internationale, parce que c'est une catastrophe qui a touché la Belgique, mais aussi de nombreux autres pays, l'Allemagne, les Pays-Bas, le Luxembourg, la France. Comment est-ce que vos relations ont été avec eux? Je sais aussi qu'il y a eu des gens qui sont venus de l'étranger pour aider, donc je me demandais comment tout ça, ça a été organisé. So my question was about the international relations and cooperations during the disaster, because the floods and the storm hit not only Belgium, but also Germany, Luxembourg, France, the Netherlands, and so on. So I was asking about the international exchange of information and also the international aid that was coming to Belgium.
Oui. Donc l'aide internationale est arrivée à travers le mécanisme européen de protection civile. On a fait appel à eux dans les premières 24 heures parce qu'on était complètement dépassés. Et les premières recherches que nous avons menées avaient trait à des moyens aériens. Parce que personnellement, je ne comprenais pas pourquoi les hélicoptères ne pouvaient pas voler. Donc je me disais que c'était lié à certaines caractéristiques de nos appareils. Ce n'était pas le cas. Donc à travers le mécanisme de protection civile européenne. Alors on avait déjà eu la chance de faire un exercice avec eux. Donc on connaissait le système de fonctionnement. Et ce sont principalement les pompiers et la protection civile qui les ont accueillis sur le terrain. En tentant au maximum de définir des secteurs et de leur attribuer des missions. Avec comme grosse difficulté, je l'ai évoqué, la mobilité sur le terrain. Donc c'était très compliqué. Et parfois, on a eu des équipes internationales qui se sont perdues. C'est arrivé. Ça a augmenté évidemment la difficulté. Et peut-être, je termine ici, avec une difficulté particulière, c'est que les équipes qui sont venues en renfort de France, d'Allemagne, des Pays-Bas, ne sont pas toutes autonomes. Et donc, il a aussi fallu prendre en charge et prendre des mesures pour les accueillir.
Okay, so Catherine tells us that the EU Civil Protection Mechanism was activated in the first 24 hours that followed the disaster. So there was some aid coming, especially with some like helicopters and things like that. And so among the main challenges that were faced was like that it was the mobilities. It was hard to move on the field, so that was a challenge that affected the aid, and also sometimes, some of the teams also had to be like, welcome and hosted and have some instructions and so on. And also the way they were working is that they were affected to some specific zones with specific missions, so it was done quite locally.
Okay, I think we're going to finish a little bit early. A big merci beaucoup, Catherine. It's really good.
Thank you.
So a round of applause for Catherine.